On my 58th birthday, my wife rented out the back room of our local country club. She told me it was just dinner with a few old friends. I walked in and 20 people jumped up and yelled surprise. It wasn't the kind of surprise that makes you laugh. It was the kind that tightens your stomach before your brain catches up. There were balloons with my face photoshopped onto a sleeping sloth. A cake that read "World's Okayest Husband." And then came the real kicker. A projector screen lit up with a presentation titled, in bold Comic Sans, "Lessons from My Lazy Husband." The first slide was a photo of me passed out on the couch, arms crossed, mouth open. "This is how he prepares for job interviews," she joked into the mic, while people chuckled. The second was a blurry picture of me at the stove. She'd added a caption, "His idea of cooking?" Staring at the microwave like it owes him money. The laughter got louder, some polite, some cruel. Her coworkers, who barely knew me, were wiping tears from their eyes. My stepdaughter, now in college, let out a loud snort when a clip played of me trying to assemble an IKEA shelf. I'd muttered, "Why are there no words on these damn instructions?" And she had edited it to repeat like a broken loop. I stood there. I didn't say a word. I didn't smile. Didn't blink. Just watched her drink her second glass of wine, absolutely glowing. She was in her element, laughing, controlling the room, basking in her own cleverness. It wasn't just a roast. It was a public execution of dignity, disguised as humor. And the worst part? Everyone seemed to think it was okay, like it was normal, like I had earned this. Some people fear death. Others fear loneliness. But I think what most men over 60 fear, deep down, is becoming a joke. Not out there in the world we can survive that, but in our own homes, by the hands of someone who once promised to protect us. That night, when she leaned in to kiss my cheek for the cameras, I just tilted my head back and let her lips land on air. She laughed it off. "Oh, don't be dramatic, honey. You know I love you." She winked. Then she whispered, "It's just a joke. Lighten up, right?" That was the moment it crystallized. The part of me that used to argue, that used to beg for understanding, that used to try to fix things, that part just shut off. Quietly, permanently. I waited until the guests had left and the buzz of drunken chatter had faded into silence. She was busy uploading clips to social media, tagging people, captioning it all with things like, "Birthday roast," "He was such a good sport," and #wifey humor. I watched her for a long time from the hallway. Something about her posture, her ease, it confirmed what I needed to know. She wasn't cruel out of malice. She was cruel because she didn't believe I had the power to leave. And if you're still listening, if this kind of story hits close to home, please consider subscribing. More than 97% of people listen without subscribing, but it genuinely helps the team keep telling stories like this. Anyway, I didn't make a scene, didn't yell, didn't throw plates or sleep on the couch. I kissed her forehead goodnight, and while she slept like a baby on my side of the bed, I sat in the dark living room. One photo from that slideshow kept looping in my head. Not the embarrassing ones, but a candid shot she had taken without me noticing. I was reading in the backyard under our dying apricot tree. The sun hit just right. I looked content. Not lazy, not weak, just mine. She had turned even that into a punchline. I stared at that damn tree through the window. It was October, leaves brittle, the branches bare. And I realized I felt the same way. Not dead, but done blooming. When the sun rose, I made coffee. Black, no sugar. I packed a single duffel bag. No passport, no cards, no phone. Just a battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, some old work clothes, and a flash drive I hadn't touched in years. I left my wedding ring next to her laptop, right beside the mouse she used to edit my dignity out of existence. By the time she woke up, I was already walking down the road. No plan, no destination. Just one final, absolute thought repeating in my mind like scripture. You want a punchline? Fine. Let's see how funny I am when the silence starts answering back. It wasn't a dramatic exit. No slammed doors. No shouting match. No emotionally charged letter stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow. Just the soft hiss of rain against the windows, and the sound of a zipper closing over the last pair of socks I'd ever pack in that house. I left the wallet deliberately. Cards, ID, insurance, everything. Neatly laid out on the kitchen counter beside the unopened bottle of Rioja she'd planned to uncork for my real birthday dinner. She had said the slideshow was just the warm-up. That tomorrow would be intimate. Just us, no jokes. Sure. Because nothing says intimacy like a PowerPoint presentation labeled, his greatest failures. I didn't take cash. Just the clothes on my back and a duffel with 2 changes, 1 thermos, and a notebook full of passwords I was going to change the moment I reached a place with Wi-Fi. She didn't know it yet, but every financial and digital tether that connected us was already frayed to its last thread. I'd been preparing, not with fury, but with the methodical detachment of a man packing his own coffin. The email accounts, deleted by midnight. The one in her name that I helped set up for her Etsy side hustle, transferred to her fully, along with the domain and server credentials. I left her everything she claimed she built alone. Just made sure she actually owned it now. No more ghost work behind the curtain. The phone number? Gone. SIM snapped in half, both pieces flushed down a bus station toilet by 3 a.m. By sunrise, I'd filed a signed, notarized quitclaim deed to remove myself from the house title. Sent it electronically through a public library terminal 6 towns over. No lawyer, no fuss, just a clean removal. Same with the joint bank accounts. We'd structured them as either/or, and I drained my side months ago into a separate account under a new LLC. I left her the shell. Legally, officially, generously. I made it easy for her to play victim if she wanted. She'd wake up with the house, the cars, the money, the accounts, and the passwords. She could cry abandonment to anyone who'd listen. But I made sure I didn't owe her a cent. No alimony. No spousal support. Just freedom, hers and mine. She once joked that I wouldn't last 2 weeks without her. That I needed her. That I didn't have the spine to start over at my age. And the way she said it, with wine in her teeth, with smug little shrugs, with that whisper behind closed doors. Be grateful not every woman would keep you around. It was never about love. It was about dominance. It was about watching a man shrink. So I shrank. Quietly, invisibly, into nothing she could trace. At exactly 7:42 a.m., her iPad would buzz with a legal notification from the registrar confirming the house title change. A second message would arrive from our former joint accountant, triggered automatically through a script I wrote, that simply read, per Richard's request, please direct all future correspondence to Ms. Fairchild exclusively. He has formally relinquished all claims. The funny part? I didn't have to go that far. But I wanted to leave no ambiguity. No hooks. No strings. No loopholes she could pull on 5 months from now when she realized no one was going to swoop in and fix the garbage disposal or file the quarterly estimates for her candle business. There was no note. No argument to replay. Just silence and legal closure. I even canceled the HOA membership auto-renewal. She'd find out when they call about the weeds. At the corner of our neighborhood, I passed Mr. Tillerson walking his dog. He squinted in the rain, opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Just gave me a nod. I nodded back. I walked 3 miles to a diner off Route 12. Ordered black coffee, no food. Took out the notebook and began listing out the final digital breadcrumbs to sweep away. The waitress asked if I was headed somewhere. I told her I was already there. There's a moment in a man's life when everything inside just clicks off. Not out of defeat, but calculation. That moment came for me at 11:23 p.m. the night before, when I saw the folder labeled Birthday Roast 2023 in her Google Drive. Subfolders, a spreadsheet, practice audio files. She had planned the whole thing weeks in advance, scheduled it between nail appointments and Pilates. You don't stay married to someone who mocks your death in advance. Because that's what it was. A funeral in slideshow form, only I hadn't had the decency to die yet. So I did the next best thing. I vanished, in plain sight, and not a single person asked me to stay. 3 weeks after I disappeared, she posted a reel on Instagram. Her sipping rose in the kitchen, captioned, he's still sulking face with tears of joy guess, I'm the birthday villain now. It got 74 likes and a few comments from her friends. People I used to grill steaks for on the weekends. Egging her on with things like, he'll be back. They always come back. Someone even wrote, you didn't do anything wrong. He's too sensitive. The next day, her stepdaughter called from college. The bursar's office had emailed. Tuition payment failed. Twice. She figured it was just a glitch. Maybe the new card needed authorization. Except when she logged into the account we'd set up for educational expenses, it was locked. Access revoked. See, that account wasn't in her name. It never had been. I'd built it before we were even married, part of a separate revocable trust. I added her as a convenience. When she laughed at me during a dinner party for calling it future-proofing, she thought it was about the economy. It wasn't. It was about her. She called our accountant, well, my former accountant, He answered, confused. You're not listed on that trust, he said. Technically, you've never had legal access. It's administered through a corporate trustee. She laughed, thinking it was a mistake. That can't be. I've been paying her school from it for years. He paused, then added, no, he has. The silence must have tasted different that day. Still, she wasn't worried. Not yet, just annoyed, until the brown envelope came. The one from the IRS. A notice of audit, triggered by a discrepancy in income reporting from 2 years back. The year she started her Etsy store, and I helped her fudge a few things to reduce her self-employment tax. She insisted we take deductions on mileage she never drove, claim office space she didn't use, and she insisted I do the filing. I did, under my personal preparer ID. Now I was gone, and that audit letter named her, but relied entirely on documentation that only I had. On drives, in backups, behind passwords she didn't know and never bothered to learn because that's your job. She called the IRS, waited on hold for 47 minutes. They asked for records, receipts, logs. She told them her husband had them. They asked, and where is your husband? She didn't have an answer. Then came the second problem. The merchant account linked to her Etsy store froze. Routine verification, they claimed. We just need confirmation of ownership and digital consent from the cosigner. She emailed support. They replied, we require live confirmation from Mr. R. Harlan. That's when the calls started. Old suppliers, clients, even a local photographer she had stiffed on a headshot session. All wanting to know if she was still running things, or if the business had folded. Apparently, I'd quietly begun disentangling myself from every back-end connection she never realized I managed. She tried logging into the cloud storage we used for family documents. The password had been changed. The recovery email redirected to a dead domain. She tried the alarm app for the house. Same issue. One by one, her conveniences unraveled. Not violently, not with malice, just with absence. Like someone had pulled the center thread from a sweater. And it took her 3 weeks to notice she was standing half-naked. Her lawyer friend, the one she gossiped with over wine, advised her to file a police report. He abandoned the marital contract, she said. That's leverage. Except she never formally added herself to any legal agreements. I made sure of that. She always said, I trust you, I don't need paperwork. And I always replied, exactly. She gave me everything I needed. Her trust, her digital laziness, her belief that the spotlight was power. And I took it, packed it up in silence. And now, she was standing under the same light, but it felt colder, harsher, like it was revealing cracks she never noticed before. By the end of that month, she stopped joking online, deleted the sulking post, removed our couple photos, changed her status to, it's complicated, even took down the Etsy store for renovation. But she hadn't hit panic yet. That wouldn't happen until she tried to refinance the house. That's when the banker would show her a file with my signature from 3 years ago, a contingency clause, an early exit authorization, executed, locked, complete. And by then, it would be too late to pretend she hadn't known what she was doing when she laughed into the mic that night and said, don't worry, folks, he's housebroken. It took her 6 weeks to stop pretending she was in control. The bravado wore off slowly, like old wallpaper peeling in corners. First came the social silence. Then the late-night emails to mutual friends asking, have you heard from him? Finally, she called the police and filed a missing person report, her voice measured, calm, almost too calm. This isn't like him, she told the officer. He's sensitive, yes, but he wouldn't just vanish. The officer raised an eyebrow. No note? No call? No personal items taken? Just a bag, maybe? I'm not sure. It was dark. He nodded, jotted something in a pad, and asked if there were marital issues. We had a disagreement. A misunderstanding, she said, almost annoyed now. The officer shrugged. Happens a lot. People go off the grid for a bit, especially men your husband's age. But they usually surface when the money runs out. That made her flinch, because the money hadn't run out. Not yet, but it was starting to slip, in ways that didn't make sense. So she hired a private investigator, a former cop named Mendez. Gruff, efficient, not particularly sympathetic. You sure you want this looked into? He asked. Some people don't want to be found for a reason. I just want answers, she said. That's all. He started with the obvious: social security records, credit reports, utilities, DMV, social media. Nothing. Not a blip. It was as if the man had died without ever triggering a death certificate. He didn't fly anywhere, Mendez said on week 2. His passport hasn't been scanned since a Vegas trip 4 years ago. No rental cars. No train tickets. No Uber history. His phone pinged one last tower the night he left, then went silent. But he wasn't suicidal, she insisted. Didn't say he was, Mendez replied. But you'd be surprised what people bury when they've got the time. That's when she learned the truth that would unspool everything. He had the time, because he'd been planning this long before the slideshow. Mendez found a small detail buried in the most mundane place. A bulk order receipt for shipping labels from 2 years prior, billed to a P.O. box 2 counties away. The name on the account? Harlan Logistics, a business she'd never heard of. Looks like he ran a side gig, Mendez said. Low volume, probably warehouse dropship stuff. Could have been research. Or cover. She laughed. He couldn't even change a printer cartridge. Mendez stared at her. Well, he changed everything else. He found more. A deleted Reddit account tied to DIY survival forums. An old Discord server where someone matching his writing style asked detailed questions about legal identity transition. Not illegal, just strategic. Another post in a privacy subreddit described how to unlink public data over time through proxy layers. The comment history had been wiped. But not before Mendez took screenshots. She started calling around. His old coworkers. The guy at the hardware store. The dog groomer. Nobody had seen him. One mentioned he once joked about becoming a monk if she ever threw him a party. They laughed. He didn't. The real gut punch came when Mendez got hold of a certain LLC registration, buried under layers of legal ownership, backdated 3 years, filed in Montana of all places. It had one purpose. A trust. Not the one she thought she knew. A new one. With a new registered agent. And a clause that redirected all estate management powers away from their joint arrangements. He untied every knot, Mendez said. Over years. Quietly. Cleanly. But why? She whispered. Mendez didn't answer, because by then she knew. She pored over her own emails. Read through old text chains. Realized how many times she'd dismissed his silences, belittled his ideas, mocked his small wins as lucky flukes. Recalled laughing with friends about how he couldn't even spell spreadsheet. And yet here he was, gone without a trace, and somehow still rearranging the pieces of her life in his absence. He's not a man, she muttered to herself one night, clutching a photo. He's a ghost who had once stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m. fixing her Etsy shipping system while she slept, who had once quietly refunded a customer she screamed at on the phone, who memorized every password she forgot and never changed the ones that mattered, until the day he vanished. Now, there were no traces of new employment, no tax returns, no benefits claimed, not even a whisper on a background check. It was like he had slipped between the cracks of the world, like a ghost with unfinished business. And worst of all, he was winning. The town didn't have a name you'd remember. One of those places where the diner coffee tastes like melted cardboard, and the motel carpet is permanently damp. But the recycling plant on the edge of it, gray, humming, forever smelling of wet paper and hot metal, didn't ask questions. That's why I chose it. I started on the night shift. No ID needed if you're willing to take cash under the table. No forms, no fingerprints, no onboarding. Just a pair of gloves, a clock to punch, and a supervisor named Big Kenny who didn't care what you did before, as long as you didn't jam the conveyor belt with plastic straws. I kept my head down, didn't speak unless spoken to, slept in a rented room above a bait shop and kept a single photo in my drawer. Not of her, not of us. Just that damn apricot tree, back when it was still alive. A reminder. By day, while everyone else slept or got drunk off cheap vodka, I read manuals, outdated PDFs on inventory systems. I watched YouTube tutorials on logistics platforms, studied the language of enterprise flowcharts, traced the paths of pallets in case studies from Amazon and FedEx. It wasn't intimacy. It wasn't romantic. It was numbers, systems, repeatable structures, things that didn't lie, didn't belittle, didn't clap when you failed. The others joked about me, called me the professor, said I was crazy for working nights and spending the day reading spreadsheets instead of sleeping. But by month 4, when the plant's inventory logs got corrupted during an overnight blackout, Guess who rewired the backup generator and rebuilt the whole system on a laptop so old it still had a CD drive? By the end of year 1, Big Kenny handed me a keycard and mumbled, "You ever think about moving to day shift? We could use someone who knows where the hell everything is." I said no. Nights were safer. Nights let me disappear. But I didn't disappear from everything. In the quiet hours between 2 a.m. and sunrise, I began redesigning their inventory flow. Not officially. Not even with permission. Just suggestions. I'd mark things in red pen. Leave diagrams on clipboards. Management started asking questions, but no one knew who was doing it. Year 2, the regional manager came in during a surprise audit. Noticed my adjustments. Asked if I'd be willing to formalize some of my ideas. I said sure, but only under contract. Only through my consulting firm. I had filed the paperwork for that months earlier. Different name, different social, different address. Registered in a neighboring state. Technically anonymous, legally sound. Cost me less than $100 to create. And just like that, I became an external consultant to the very company whose conveyor belt I used to scrub at 3 a.m. with a busted mop. By year 3, I wasn't on site anymore. I worked from a small rented office above a nail salon. No sign. No receptionist. Just a desk, 3 monitors, and a whiteboard with the phrase "Quiet Power Wins" written in permanent marker. I began traveling. Short trips. Quietly. Regional conferences on logistics. Seminars. I always wore the same plain navy suit. I let people assume I'd been in the game for years. I said very little, but when I did, I made sure it was useful, actionable, valuable. The consulting firm grew not in staff but in reach. The parent company of the recycling plant hired me to audit 5 other facilities. Then to overhaul their inventory. Then to advise on a supply chain merger. No one ever asked where I came from. They were too busy asking where they could send the check. I didn't chase validation. I chased leverage. And the thing about leverage, once you build enough of it quietly, you don't need to ask for power. It's handed to you, nervously, respectfully, sometimes even regretfully. By year 4, I had something I never had before, peace. Not forgiveness. Not justice. Just the gentle, constant hum of control. I stopped checking her name online. I no longer cared if she was dating someone new, or if she still wore the necklace I bought her from that street vendor in Lisbon. That part of my life had calcified, cold, fossilized, perfectly preserved in memory but no longer bleeding. The only reminder came in the form of a recycled magazine. One I picked up from a pile in a waiting room before a quarterly strategy meeting. On the back cover, I saw an ad for a wellness retreat. The tagline said, "Let go of your past before it drags you under." I flipped it over, and there it was. A photo of a corporate gala from 2 months earlier. A crowd of executives raising champagne. And in the corner, blurry but unmistakable, her. Still clinging to the spotlight. Still smiling like nothing ever fell apart. I folded the page and slipped it into my notebook. Not because it hurt, but because I realized something important. I had climbed without her, and she hadn't even noticed I was gone. She was at the dentist. Just a routine cleaning. 3rd cancellation this year. But she finally dragged herself in because the receptionist guilt her with the words, "We'll have to charge for the slot next time." So she went. Half lipstick, oversized sunglasses, that faint whiff of stress perfume she overused when she needed to feel like she still had control of something. The waiting room was cold, with stiff vinyl chairs and magazines that were at least 6 months out of date. She barely glanced at them, until the receptionist's phone rang, and her check-in took longer than expected. So, to fill the awkward time, she grabbed the nearest magazine off the stack without thinking. Some business rag. The kind she used to pretend to read at brunch to impress people who only cared about what coast you were working on. She flipped aimlessly. Articles about market shifts, logistics trends, corporate leadership. Blah, blah, blah. And then she froze. It was the photo that did it. A full-page feature. Sharp suit. Crisp lighting. No smile. That unmistakable posture. Shoulders straight. One hand tucked inside the opposite sleeve like he was half aware of his own power and not in a hurry to show it off. The title read, R. Harlan, the ghost who turned giants around. She dropped the magazine. Literally dropped it. It thudded onto the tiled floor, and 2 other patients glanced over. She forced a tight smile, picked it up, and flipped back to the page with shaking fingers. The article described a man who quietly emerged in the logistics and industrial recovery sector, turning failing supply chains into gold mines. It detailed how his firm, registered out of a sleepy Midwestern town, had gone from unknown to indispensable in 4 years flat. No social media, no interviews, just performance. But she didn't need the write-up. She knew. The eyes. That expression. She had seen it in her kitchen for 13 years. Seen it in their wedding photos. Seen it in her slideshow, right before she layered a fart sound effect over a clip of him falling asleep on the couch. Except now the eyes weren't tired. They weren't soft. They weren't begging to be included. They were cold. Focused. Done. She skimmed the article 3 times. Then slower, line by line. The company name. The consulting firm's location. The regional focus. The reference to a private trust funding philanthropic ventures. She nearly choked. Because one of those ventures was sponsoring a coding bootcamp her stepdaughter had tried to get into months ago. The rejection email now felt like a loaded gun she never realized had been aimed at her. Her hand clutched the magazine so tightly the page started to tear. She flipped to the next spread. There he was again, standing at the head of a conference table, explaining a network diagram to a group of executives twice his age. They were listening, hanging on every word. The caption below the photo, "When our Harlan speaks, the room leans in." Her jaw clenched. She remembered those same diagrams on sticky notes around their living room. She used to roll her eyes and say, "Can you take your little side project off the coffee table? My friends are coming over." He always complied, always moved his work into the garage or back room, always retreated. Not anymore. The receptionist finally called her name. She didn't respond, just kept flipping. At the end of the article was a quote attributed to him. "You don't have to scream to win. You just have to outlast the noise." She folded the magazine shut and held it in her lap. Her legs were numb. Not from shock. Shock wears off. This was something worse. Recognition. The understanding that while she was joking about him sulking, while she was sipping wine and shrugging at friends, while she was too busy explaining away the cracks, he had been building an empire beneath her silence. Not spitefully, not angrily, but with precision, with patience, with brutal elegance. She stood up abruptly, muttered something about rescheduling, and walked out without seeing the dentist. Once in her car, she sat behind the wheel and stared straight ahead. 1,000 memories raced through her head at once. Not of him yelling. He never yelled. Not of him leaving. He didn't make a sound. Just the quiet moments. The overlooked ones. Him waking up early to check delivery routes. Him watching webinars in silence. Him quietly correcting her stepdaughter's FAFSA application while she pretended to be too busy. Him making dinner the night before the slideshow, setting the table, folding her napkin. All those things she had labeled lazy habits. All that time he'd been loading the gun she never saw coming. She opened her phone, Googled his company. Nothing direct. No phone number. No email. Just a press contact linked to a faceless PR firm. She dialed anyway. A polite assistant answered. "Yes, hi, I'm trying to reach, Harlan. He's someone I knew. Can you tell him I'm sorry, ma'am." The voice cut her off, polite but firm. "Mr. Harlan doesn't accept personal messages through this line." Click. She sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, at her own reflection, and for the first time in her life, she was the one who had no idea what to say. She booked the ticket that same afternoon. One way, first class, charged to a card she hadn't used in years, the one still tied to their old joint account. The one she'd kept active out of nostalgia or arrogance or maybe just laziness. She figured he might see the charge. That he'd know she was coming. That maybe, just maybe, he'd break whatever spell he'd cast and speak to her. The flight was a blur. She didn't sleep. Didn't eat. She sat rigid, clutching the magazine like a court summons, rereading the article until the paper softened at the corners. A seatmate tried to make small talk. She stared through him. The address had been printed under the company's feature blurb. Regional HQ, a modest-looking campus just outside a mid-sized city she couldn't have placed on a map a week ago. She rented a car, got lost once, then found it. 3 buildings, white stone, steel trim, understated wealth. Nothing flashy, but clean, sharp, serious. She walked in like she owned the place. No appointment, no phone call. Just stormed through the revolving glass doors in 3-inch heels and a silk blouse too dressy for business but not quite casual enough for sincerity. She marched up to the front desk. "I need to speak to my husband," she said, breath tight, tone clipped. The receptionist looked up with professional confusion. I'm sorry, your husband? Harlan, she said. We were married. He knows me. Just tell him I'm here. The receptionist blinked. You mean Mr. Harlan? Her jaw tensed. Yes, tell him his wife is here. A few quiet keystrokes. A glance at a security monitor. Then a perfectly even reply. I'll let him know a visitor came by. That was it. Not come this way. Not take a seat. Not even please hold. Just that. Then a subtle signal behind the desk. Less than a minute later, a security officer in a navy blazer approached. Not aggressive. Not threatening. But with practiced authority. Ma'am, he said gently. I'll need to escort you outside. Her mouth opened. Excuse me. The receptionist didn't look up again. The officer added, Mr. Harlan is currently in a private executive session. He does not receive unannounced visitors. I was his wife, she snapped. The officer nodded like he'd heard it all before. Understood. I still need you to step outside. She didn't move at first. Not out of defiance, but out of disbelief. She looked around, expecting someone to recognize her. Something. A glimpse. A reaction. But no one looked up. No one whispered. No one said, Oh my God. That's her. She wasn't infamous. She was irrelevant. The officer gestured again. She followed. Outside, the late afternoon heat clashed with the cold pit forming behind her sternum. She walked 10 paces from the door before turning back. But the security officer didn't follow. He simply returned to his post. She waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. Stood under the awning. Crossed her arms. Paced. No one came. No one opened the door. She tried calling the corporate number. Went to a directory. Chose his extension. It rang once. Then voicemail. You have reached the executive office of R. Harlan. Mr. Harlan is not available to take your call. Please leave a message or direct inquiries through corporate communications. She didn't leave a message. She sat on the curb. She hadn't sat on a curb in 20 years. Not since her first marriage, when her ex locked her out during an argument and she spent 3 hours outside waiting for the apology that never came. She'd told herself she'd never feel that powerless again. And yet here she was. Different man. Same silence. Only now there was no lock to pick. No door to pound. No neighbors to embarrass. Just a corporate fortress and a man who had legally erased her. She called Mendez, the PI. He's here, she said, voice cracking. He's inside. I saw the building. I saw his name on the office directory. I told you, Mendez replied quietly. You're chasing a ghost who built his own city. She hung up. An hour passed. Then another. Eventually, the sun started to dip, and the lights inside began to glow. She watched Suits walk out. Not him. Never him. As if he'd vanished again. But this time, from right behind the curtain she couldn't lift. She drove to a hotel nearby. Small business class. Asked for one night. The clerk offered her a coupon for room service. She declined. In the room, she opened the minibar. Took out a tiny bottle of bourbon. She hadn't touched hard liquor since their 4th anniversary. The one where he booked a B&B and she spent the weekend scrolling her phone. She downed it in one sip. It came on a Wednesday, 2.5 weeks after she flew home in silence, having stared at a locked door like it might still feel pity if she waited long enough. The envelope didn't look like mail. It looked like a promise. Thick, heavy, cream-colored. Her name handwritten in calligraphy that wasn't digital. It had flow, hesitation, human weight. No return address. Just a wax seal pressed into the back flap. The emblem unfamiliar but vaguely regal. For a second, her breath caught in her throat. She carried it into the kitchen like it might explode. Set it down next to a half-eaten yogurt and stared at it. Her fingers hovered. Then she cracked the seal and slid out the contents. Inside was an invitation. Not a flyer. Not a postcard. An invitation. Thick cardstock. Foil embossing. No brand logos. Just a deep navy border. An engraved crest. And the words, You are cordially invited to the 12th Annual Bluebridge Executive Gala. Hosted by the Bluebridge Foundation in celebration of industrial innovation and strategic excellence. Guest of honor, R. Harlan. She froze. Below the name, in italic script, was the event location. A private venue in the same state she had just flown from. Date, 2 weeks from Friday. Dress code, black tie. Her eyes caught a second slip of paper tucked behind the invitation. She slid it out with careful fingers. Smaller. Handwritten. Just one line. You once said I'd never be more than your shadow. Come see the man I became when I stepped out of it. No signature. None needed. She stared at the note for a full minute before sitting down hard on the barstool. The words weren't cruel. They weren't bitter. They were worse. They were precise. That line. She remembered saying it. Not in anger. Not in a fight. But in that sing-song tone she used when she wanted to seem wise and cutting without being openly hostile. It was a brunch and he'd just mentioned applying for a logistics coordinator role. She'd laughed and said, "Why aim for management? You're best behind the scenes. You're my shadow. Safe there." He had smiled back at her that day. Now she realized it hadn't been agreement. It had been recording. She read the note again. Come see the man I became when I stepped out of it. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to witness the consequences of her own disbelief. She told herself it was closure. That was why she'd go. To close the loop. To look him in the eye, apologize, maybe, or ask for, not forgiveness but something like neutrality. Peace. But she also felt something uglier. Hope. The poisonous kind. That tiny flicker of desperate fantasy. Maybe he invited me because he wants to see me too. Maybe this is how we start over. She laughed at herself. Then drank half a bottle of wine and tried on every dress she still fit into. None of them felt right. Too dated. Too safe. Too loud. She booked a stylist. Not the regular one. She didn't want anyone local knowing. She booked a flight. Not first class this time. Economy. She didn't want to be recognized. She booked a hotel. Sleek, modern, anonymous. For the next week, she spiraled through preparations. Manicure, hair, brows. She called her therapist for the first time in 6 months and left a vague voicemail. Just checking in. Might have something intense coming up. She didn't tell her friends. Not the real reason. She said she was going to a business networking event. Potential new project. She lied. Old connections. She told her stepdaughter nothing at all. But each night, she reread that line. Come see the man I became when I stepped out of it. And with each reading the hope shrank. Because she wasn't invited as a guest. She was invited as a witness. Not to his success. To her irrelevance. The valet opened her door like she was someone important. She stepped out slowly, the borrowed gown clinging too tightly around the waist, the heels just half a size too loose. She'd rented both. Couldn't justify a new dress for a night like this. Not when she wasn't even sure what kind of night it would be. The venue was unreal. Not gaudy. No chandeliers or gold accents or velvet ropes. It was elegant. Steel beams, warm light, architectural glass that reflected the skyline like a second, colder city. Inside, murmurs filled the air. Champagne flutes clinked. Soft jazz bled from hidden speakers. Everyone looked tailored, clean, confident. She didn't belong, but she walked in anyway. A woman at the check-in table smiled. Name? She hesitated. I'm a guest of Mr. Harlan. No eyebrow raised. No smirk. Just a nod. Of course. Please, this way. That line, of course, sounded rehearsed. But she let herself believe it meant something. Inside, the space opened into a massive gallery, walls lined with projection screens showing muted images of shipping routes, supply chain diagrams, and, bizarrely, schoolchildren coding in classrooms sponsored by the Bluebridge Foundation. She didn't care. She scanned every face. And then she saw him, across the room. Not center stage. Not posturing. Just standing near a semicircle of executives, holding a glass of something dark, listening as a younger man explained a chart. Harlan. Him. Older. Sharper. Cold in the way that makes people straighten their backs when he looks at them. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. People nodded when he spoke. Deferred. Not performatively, genuinely. A woman leaned in, clearly waiting for his opinion. Another executive laughed at something he said, then immediately stopped laughing when he didn't join in. He hadn't seen her yet. She stepped forward. Heart thudding. Skin buzzing with the kind of anxiety that comes only when you're fully, completely out of your depth. Halfway there, she hesitated. What was she even going to say? He turned, glanced over. Their eyes met, and he looked right past her. It was subtle, just enough to acknowledge her presence as background. The way you notice an extra in a film scene. Not the way a man acknowledges someone who once swore forever beside him. She kept walking. Richard. she blurted when she got close, hating how desperate her voice sounded. He didn't flinch, didn't correct her, just looked her dead in the eye. She tried to smile, failed. Her lipstick felt wrong, too dark. "Why did you invite me?" she asked, and hated herself for asking it. He studied her for a beat, not cruelly, not even with resentment, just with distance. Then he said evenly, "So you'd know I was never weak, just done." The words sliced through everything she had built to hold herself together. He didn't follow it up. No smirk, no lecture, just that line. He turned back toward the conversation and gave a small nod to one of the board members, who handed him a sleek black folder. He tucked it under his arm like nothing had just happened, like she wasn't even there. She stood frozen. No one paid attention to her. Not the bartender behind her. Not the server with the tray of hors d'oeuvres. Not the woman in the emerald dress who brushed past her without a glance. And that's when she realized she wasn't part of this room. She was part of a memory he had outgrown, preserved only long enough to prove that he could outgrow it. She backed away, slowly, stumbled once in the too high shoes. Someone whispered behind her. Not about her, just a casual comment, and it hit her like thunder. She had no power here, no leverage, not even presence. For years, she had told friends that he was sweet, but forgettable, that he couldn't lead a room, that he was a background kind of guy. Now, watching him command the floor with a tilt of his head, she understood the real truth. He hadn't been forgettable. He had just been waiting for her to let go of the leash. And when she finally had, he hadn't run. He risen. She didn't remember taking the final steps toward him. 1 second, she was rooted to the marble floor, reeling from that sentence, "So you'd know I was never weak, just done." And the next, her hand was outstretched, trembling, reaching across a sea of noise and tailored suits toward the man she used to share a mortgage with. A bed. A life. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even glance her way. But someone else did. A young woman, early 20s, clipboard in hand, stepped beside him and said, "Mr. Harlan, would you mind signing a few?" She held out a stack of glossy magazines. That magazine, the one from the dentist's office, the one that had shattered her illusion of his insignificance. He took the top copy, drew a smooth, practiced pen from his inside pocket. Not a scribble, not a flourish, just a clean signature beneath the black and white photo of him in mid-step, confident and lean and unreachable. He handed it back to the woman, then paused, and without looking, without acknowledging her directly, he extended one of the magazines sideways, toward her, still not facing her, still no eye contact, just the silent gesture, efficient and final. She took it, numb fingers, hollow lungs. The crowd around him shifted. Someone chuckled. A toast was made in the background. A subtle beat of jazz pulsed through the room again like a heartbeat reawakening. He walked away, not fast, not slow, just away. No drama, no turn of the head, no cinematic pause. And just like that, she was holding the last thing he'd ever give her. She looked down. Below the article title, "The Ghost Who Turned Giants Around," he had underlined a single sentence. He disappeared once, returned as something untouchable. She stared at it, mouth open, but nothing came out. Her fingers tightened around the paper until the edges crinkled. She tried to breathe, couldn't. Tried to move, didn't. Someone brushed past her shoulder, muttered a distracted, "Excuse me," and kept walking. The clatter of forks against porcelain resumed. The conversations grew louder again, swallowing the moment like a wave reclaiming a footprint. She backed into the nearest seat, some brushed velvet monstrosity meant for show more than comfort, and dropped into it like her body had suddenly remembered gravity. The magazine lay across her lap, mocking in its elegance. Untouchable. That word echoed like a brick through glass. She wanted to scream, wanted to grab his arm and force him to look at her, to say something, anything that would give her a foothold again. Even rage would have been better than this surgical detachment. But she didn't move, because deep down she knew there was no longer a single word she could say that would matter. Not to him, not here, not now. He had rewritten the story, and her chapter was over. The man she mocked into silence hadn't just returned. He'd rewritten the ending, one calculated absence at a time. And the only sound left was the echo of her own laugh from years ago, bouncing off walls that no longer remembered her name. She stayed seated until the room emptied, until the lights dimmed, until no one even noticed she was still there, clutching a page with the last sentence she would ever receive from the man she once thought would never leave.